Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well and welcome to another installment or volume of what I've been watching. Now, a few days ago I posted my What I've Been Watching Volume 8 where I dove into the TV shows that I checked out in the early months of 2023 that I haven't had a chance to do separate reviews on my channel. And so hopefully you guys checked out that video where you got to see some mini-ish, by my standards, reviews of these TV shows. As I mentioned in that video, I also have a bunch of movies to catch up on from the early months of 2023, and that's what we're going to be diving into today. So for today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys some mini reviews on some films that I have checked out in the last few months. So if that sounds good to you guys, then keep on watching, and as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on your notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. Now without further ado guys, let's dive into what I've been watching. Okay, so the first movie up on the roster is John Wick Chapter 4, which is directed by Chad Stahelski, who also directed the previous 3 John Wick movies. Now, I believe I have reviewed at least one other John Wick movie on this channel. Perhaps it was the 3rd one, I think. But in that review, I'm sure my thoughts were pretty much the same as the thoughts that I have for this latest installment in this franchise, which is, wow, these action sequences are incredible. Okay, if there's one thing that you can rely on when it comes to the John Wick franchise, it's just mind-boggling, amazing action sequences. And that's why I go to this franchise, honestly. It's not really for the detailed, intricate storytelling. It's not really about the great character work or character development. When it comes to the character of John Wick, he is very stagnant in his development. He hasn't developed too much. Perhaps he's become more weary and tired as the franchise has gone on, but the premise has still remained rather consistent since the first film. And I think the first film was good at establishing the motives of the character, where his mind is at, and the background of the character himself, and that was enough storytelling to kind of propel this franchise forward since then. And there have been bits and bobs that they have added, like the lore of the Continental and this global network of assassins, which I think is really appealing, and it's really great seeing these different corners of the world and how they connect to this global network. So all of the lore that they've built around the assassins and the Continental and, you know, hotels and all of that is great work, but still primarily what we're all here for is the action sequences, right? I mean, these stories and this world building is all designed to propel the action sequences forward, and they do that really effectively. So when it comes to this latest installment in the John Wick franchise, we follow on from chapter 3 where what happened in what happened in chapter 3 again? I can't remember. I believe that's the one he lost a finger in, right? Yeah, he had to give up a finger for some reason. I think Halle Berry was there with some dogs. I vaguely remember what happened in chapter 3, but it doesn't matter because, like I said, it's all about the action. It's all about the experience. But I believe in chapter 4, we still have the global network of assassins chasing after John Wick. There's a bounty on his head because he broke the table's rules for something. I think it's because he wants to leave the assassin life behind, and so they're chasing after him for some reason. There's something about the assassins chasing after him, and so he has to run. And run he does, okay? And along the way, he kills a bunch of folks. But at the beginning of the film, we see him in this other Continental hotel in Japan. And I love the styling of this location. You know, the set design, I think, was brilliant. The way that they use lighting, just to really establish that this is a different, you know, style of a hotel. Still part of the same network, but it embodies a lot of that Japanese culture and environment, which again adds to the individualistic nature of each of these hotels. So you have a really awesome action sequence right at the beginning, as John Wick films are wont to do, to really get your attention and your blood pumping right from the jump. You're already sitting at the edge of your seat there, and the action sequence at the beginning is really long as well. It's really intricate. I mean, Chad Stahelski is an action guy, you know, he's a stuntman, and so he knows how to deliver on these sequences. But what impresses me more is, like I said, the styling, the set design, I think is so cool in these action sequences for these John Wick movies. And again, it helps establish, you know, the different environments and hotels that John Wick finds himself in. I will say though, it was a little bit suspect that the head of the Japanese hotel was willing to sacrifice everything for John Wick. I was like, so there's being a good friend and then there's being a bit stupid, okay? And I think, you know, the fact that his daughter's life was on the line, the fact that his own life was on the line, and also his entire hotel, like, I think that's a pretty big sacrifice for a guy that, you know as a friend, but like, what has he ever done for you? And I think that's my one little gripe, just in general, is that you get the sense that John Wick is just bulldozing through the whole world, and you have all these people who are willing to help him, but like, you never really get to see the side of John Wick that helps others. I mean, we know he's very sympathetic towards dogs, like, we know that. Okay, don't be hurting any dogs in John Wick's presence, okay? But in terms of his like character, his persona, he's not really the most like giving or selfless individual for him to be earning this kind of treatment from others. And so you really get the sense that he gets this treatment because he's the main character, like it's his main character energy. Just like, and two more notes on the opening action sequence that takes place in Japan. First of all, Rina Samayawa, I believe the music artist, she stars as the Japanese hotel manager's daughter, and she was so cool. She was so sick. I was like, sis, you're doing bits here, okay? I don't actually listen to her music. I do want to check it out. But after seeing her in this film, I was super impressed with her agility, her commitment to this role. I mean, there are so many occasions where you have a singer who, you know, does an acting role and it's a little bit catastrophic. Okay, see Taylor Swift in Amsterdam. But here, Rina was like in this. She fit in perfectly. Like, this was a role perfectly constructed for her, and she really committed here and delivered. And I believe there was an after credit scene, which I actually didn't watch. I didn't even realize it was there, where there's some kind of implication that she's going after Donnie Yen's character, and I would love to see a follow-up on that, because those two, like, that could be the makings of a really great sort of enemy dynamic. And speaking of Donnie Yen's character, we are, you know, formally introduced to him and his abilities in the Japanese action sequence, where he absolutely kills it. I love it when action sequences are creative and they just do different things, you know, just do different things with action, and that's exactly what you get with Donnie Yen's character. I think Kane or Zane or whatever is his name, but he's blind, so very similar to the character that Donnie Yen also portrayed in Rogue One, funnily enough. But he's such a cool character. The fact that he's blind plays into how he approaches, you know, action and, you know, fighting his enemies. And so he has these little gadgets and the setup that he does before he even starts anything. And I think that's so clever. I loved his attitude. I loved his mannerisms and his movement. Like, he was just different to everyone else, and you got the sense that, like, oh, this is the guy that can this is the guy that can kill you in 786 ways. Like, this guy knows every single way to kill someone. Like, this guy, you will never find nobody. It's over. So you have this extended action sequence in Japan that really sets the tone for the whole film. But I have to say, after that sequence, things get a little bit blurry for me. I think the middle does have a bit of a lull to it, where it gets a little bit confusing. He's chasing after various things. I believe he has to find a family so that he can partake in this duel so that he can get his freedom. And also, of course, before I forget, you also had the plot point where the manager of the Continental, played by Ian McShane, he ends up losing his hotel because the table suspects that he's been in league with John Wick, even though he chucked him out of a window. And so his like co-manager, or the guy that was like running things as well, played by Lance Reddick, R.I.P., but he actually gets killed, you know, at the beginning of the film. And so Ian McShane's character is also invested in this whole ordeal for his own selfish reasons, and he is negotiating on John Wick's behalf, but making sure that he gets a little bit on his end as well. So you have this whole back and forth going on between John Wick and Ian McShane, and the table, whose representative is portrayed by Billy Skarsgård, who's just fantastically annoying, just fantastically obnoxiously French in this movie. And you get the sense that he's like a sniveling little bureaucrat. Like he wants to present himself as this big tough guy, but in reality he doesn't actually want to get his hands dirty. He doesn't even want to lift a finger, and we see that at the end with the duel. But before we get ahead of ourselves, as I mentioned before, this middle section of the film, the second act, is a little bit middling. It's nothing really new or spectacular in the John Wick franchise, and it's really when the characters go to Paris that things really take off. When you see the steps, if you're watching the film for the first time, sorry about the spoilers, but if you're watching it for the second time, you know it gets good when you see the damn steps to Sacré-Cœur. As soon as you see that, I never would have imagined that you could stretch so much, like you could get so much gold out of a sequence that takes place on some steps. Granted, the steps are long, like granted, okay, there's a long ass flight of stairs to Sacré-Cœur, which is like the highest point you know, in Paris, but still it's so incredible how they use that environment. It's such a great sort of setup for an amazing and again unique action sequence, and also it goes on forever. And there's at one point where you think like, oh my goodness, we've made it, because John Wick is fighting to get up those stairs to Sacré-Cœur so he can make his rendezvous for, I think it was sunrise, where he had to have the duel. But then literally just as he's about to make it, some more bad guys come along and literally just went and he tumbles down the stairs. He tumbles down what, like 200 stairs, and it's like, oh my god. And you have like 2 minutes left. You're like, oh no, this is not happening. And by the way, just in general, this man must be made of Teflon, because he is thrown out of clubs, he is run over, he is shot at, he like this man is just tortured in this film. But the fact that he was pushed down the steps after literally giving life and limb to get up them, he was pushed down them at the very last minute. It was like, oh, forget it. Oh, it's over. But Kane actually helps him up the stairs again, and they formulate a plan at some point to kind of rig the duel. And in the end, Kane shoots John Wick. But John Wick doesn't actually shoot back, so it doesn't count. So then Billy Skarsgård gets all excited and he's like, oh, let me get a chance. Oh, sorry. Oh, let me get a chance to shoot him myself. It's a terrible French accent. I'm so sorry. You know, John Wick has already analyzed this character. He already knows what he's about, and he knows that he's very egotistical. He wants the glory for himself, even though he's not the kind of general that will suit up and fight along his own army. So he was just waiting in the wings for the duel to, you know, go ahead. But when it came time to actually shoot John Wick, he took that opportunity, thinking that John Wick didn't have any bullets left, but in reality he did. And so, pow! They found a loophole in the rules, the many rules that the table has, and they managed to kill 2 birds, 3 birds, 4 birds with 1 stone. I personally do feel like chapter 4 also acts as a really good sort of end point for the franchise, at least for a while. I wouldn't mind if this was the last entry for a second before they, you know, focus on the other spin-offs that they have going on about the Continental and some ballerina portrayed by Ana de Armas, who I'm really kind of tired of Hollywood trying to shove her down my throat, if I'm being honest. I don't think she's particularly good. You guys saw Ghosted last week, right? Anyway, but regardless, I do think that chapter 4 is a very strong entry in the John Wick franchise. And even if it does act as the final chapter for John Wick's story as of now, I do think it has a very fitting end for the character, whilst also setting up enough that can be spun off into, you know, other corners of this franchise. Okay, so next up on my list, we have a film that was criminally underrated, that was criminally underseen. Guys, come here, come closer. I have a bone to pick with you guys. I have a bone to pick. Raise your hands if you did not see Dungeons and Dragons. Raise your hands now. Listen, okay, this is not a safe space, but please do. Please do raise your hands anyway. Okay, the consequences will be minimal if you are honest. But this is not a safe space. Raise your hands if you did not see Dungeons and Dragons in cinemas. Why? Why? I am so upset that you guys let this flop. I am so upset that this film did not get the $1 billion that it deserved. It is criminal. It is awful. It's one thing when a film that is genuinely bad, okay, that is genuinely, or even mid, just like a waste of time, not really remarkable in any way. It's one thing when a film like that flops, right? I mean, we've had several of those, and I think they've actually sucked the life out of me, which is why it took me so long to catch up on all of these reviews. But films like Shazam, films like Ant-Man Quantumania, like films like that, you know, they suck the soul out of you. There's no joy in watching them, although some people did like Shazam and Ant-Man, so respect to you guys. But then it's another thing entirely when you have a film that is full of joy, that is quirky and fun and good. Oh my god, it's good. It's one thing entirely to let a film like that flop. I will never forgive you guys for this. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I will never forgive any one of you who did not see this in the cinema. I'm so sorry, but we have beef now. I'm so sorry. But okay, I think I've gone ahead of myself here. Let me just rewind back. Okay, so Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves is directed by John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein. This is a directing duo like the Russo brothers or the Daniels. They've become quite popular these days. But here we have the second live action adaptation of a famous, is it like a board game? I think it's a board game, right? Like it's not a video game, it's a board game. Like there's, you know, a very three-dimensional board, I believe. And it's, you know, been very popular for several decades now, but it hasn't really managed to be adapted well to film or TV or anything like that. And so here comes Paramount with the opportunity to create a whole new brand from this IP. And so they took that opportunity to heart. They really put their foot in this one. The directors really knocked it out of the park, and unfortunately no one saw it. Like the box office is really low, and it just breaks my heart because it does not deserve this treatment, especially based off of the budget. Oh my goodness, this is such a flop. I'm so sad. I'm hoping that it will do better on VOD and on Paramount. Oh, it's not going to do well on Paramount Plus. Who am I kidding? No one has Paramount Plus. Oh no. Hopefully it'll go on Netflix one day. It's over. Because this is honestly a good quality, feel good family film that is so well produced, guys. It's genuinely well directed, and the cast knocks it out of the park. Like it's just good. I don't know what to tell you. It's just a good film. The story itself is great. The way that they set up the thieves themselves, led by Chris Pine, I think was genius. The fact that he starts off, you know, in the prison prison with Michelle Rodriguez's character, and they're explaining to the judges that are going to be considering their bail or their parole or something, you know, how this all started. Like, it's a really clever sort of premise that they start off with, but then of course they attempt to escape and he's waiting for his like winged friend to arrive, and you're thinking, oh, maybe his winged friend is going to give him like lenient treatment. Like, why is he waiting for this guy? Only to discover it's because he wanted him as part of the escape plan. But yeah, both of them managed to escape, and they end up in, you know, some land or some sort. Listen, the Dungeons and Dragons references went right over my head, right over my head. Okay, but I believe fans are really happy with them, so that's great. And they end up returning to the land of which they came, and it turns out that Hugh Grant's character has made use of the fact that they were out of the way. He was part of their troop, but he betrayed them. He was partially the reason why they were captured, and in the meantime he's become this like wealthy lord. And not only that, but he's also taken charge of Chris Pine's daughter. And so Chris Pine's like, dude, what the hell? Like, what's going on here? And his daughter is under the false belief that he left because of the jewels and diamonds and that. But in reality, he actually wanted to get some sort of thingamabob that would help bring his deceased wife. There's always a deceased wife. There is always a deceased wife. Oh my goodness. But it would help bring his deceased wife back to life. So with this misunderstanding, you have Chris Pine's daughter falsely believing that Uncle Hugh Grant has her best interests at heart. And I think a part of him, you know, did care for her, but he was still very much a narcissist. Like, it was still all about him. I think his relationship with the daughter was mostly about him liking the fact that someone was looking up to him and someone actually loved him. So when Chris Pine comes out of prison, he's like, oh my God, my daughter's in the hands of some maniac narcissist man who betrayed us. And so he wants to get her back, but she's trapped in this castle that Hugh Grant now lives in. But conveniently enough, there is going to be this town fair festival situation where everyone should be distracted enough to allow Chris Pine and the crew to get his daughter back and get some treasure or something, and also get that thing that would allow him to bring his wife back from the dead. So they have quite a few things on their list of things to do, and so they get to work. They gather their team around. At one point you have Regé-Jean Page's character part of their team, and he was an amazing addition to the film. I kind of wanted him to be in it throughout, but I actually like the fact that he kind of jumped in there, did his thing, and then left. Honestly, he was such a great character in this. You know, after seeing him in The Grey Man, which I enjoyed and no one else did. I was kind of disappointed by Regé. I was like, oh, maybe you shouldn't have left Bridgerton so early. But in this film, oh, he knocked it out of the park. Like, he was actually so good. His characterization was perfect. He was a great counterbalance to Chris Pine's character, he was also part of that same organization, right? Of the knights, like the knighthood, who had a code, but then he started stealing and got greedy, and that's partially why his wife died, and that's why he has the guilt. Now it's all coming back to me. It's been several months. Now it's all coming back to me. But my point is that this premise sets up some really great banter amongst the crew, and also some really great action sequences that keep the story moving forward in a really riveting way. You also have, like I said, a lot of callbacks to actual Dungeons and Dragons gameplay, which I think is really great, you know, paying homage and respect to the source material, and I think it would be appreciated by a lot of Dungeons and Dragons fans. And also, as I mentioned earlier, the cast here is truly brilliant. I think Chris Pine knocked it out of the park, although he's always a great charismatic lead. But then you also had Sophia Lillis, who I really loved in this film as well. I loved her character. I love the way that they used her powers. She's like this shapeshifter. I think it was so clever how they incorporated that into their plans. And I really loved Michelle Rodriguez's character as well. I loved the friendship that she had with Chris Pine's Regan's character, but also the reveal at the end. Oh my goodness, the twist at the end when she dies, and like it brings a tear to my eye because I'm like, no, I actually really liked her. But then Chris Pine decides to save her and use that little vial in order to bring her back to life, and that would have been the vial that he would have used on his deceased wife. But he admits that perhaps he was selfish and focusing on, you know, bringing back his deceased wife who only he remembers, but in reality it was Michelle Rodriguez's character who had stepped up to be a mother figure to his daughter, and their friendship had, you know, really blossomed after his wife had died. So I just think that's, I mean, guys, that's so good. And no one saw it. And speaking of great performances in the film, I also think Justice Smith's cowardly wizard in training was also a great addition to the cast. And then you also had Daisy Head, who portrays this like witch-like character who's doing the bidding of the ultimate like demonic warlord type figure, the shadow monster guy, you know the drill. She's basically his, you know, foot soldier, and she has this like very weird look to her. The only reason why I mention this is because her character kind of reminded me of the character that she portrays in Shadow and Bone, which, yes, I did watch the second season for twice actually, but it's a long story. Okay, quickly, I watched the second season of Shadow and Bone the first time. It's like background noise to when I was editing and stuff, and I was like, this is okay. But then I kind of became obsessed with the crows. I became obsessed with the crows. This is an impromptu review of Shadow and Bone. I became obsessed with the crows, right? And so I actually went back and rewatched season 1, and I was like, this is a good show. And then I rewatched season 2, but only the crows part. So yeah, I'm fully on board with Shadow and Bone. Where's season 3 at Netflix? I really want a season 3, but more than season 3, I want a spin-off for the crows alone. I believe that exists in the books. Like, I believe they have their own duology, which part of me wants to read actually, and I'm not even a big reader, so that's like a big deal for me. But I kind of want to read the duology because I'm kind of in love with these characters. I love Wylan and Jesper. I want to see what happens to Inej and Kaz. Like, I'm invested, okay? But anywho, the point is, Daisy Head was also in Shadow and Bone, and she portrayed a very similar character, and she knocks it out of the park here as well. And then of course you have Hugh Grant, who is this, like, again, narcissistic middleman between the good guys and the bad guys. He betrayed the original group in favor of getting money and glory for himself, whilst Chris Pine and Michelle Rodriguez were like captured. And so, you know, he's benefiting from all of that, as well as his deal with the devil. And he's in his like era of doing whatever he wants. And so much like his performance in The Gentleman, I found it to be really funny, really fun, and like he doesn't take himself too seriously in this film. But I think he's like a welcome addition to the cast. Like, he doesn't just phone it in either. Like, his personality suits the story and his character perfectly, and so again, it just adds to the really great cast here. So all in all, guys, this film had it all. It had a really, really great cast, a really good story with like a perfect structure that kept me engaged from start to finish. It had some really cool different action sequences that were unique and incorporated, you know, the lore from the board games, and these action sequences also had fantastic special effects. How many times have I sat here on this chair and looked you guys dead in the eyes and said that the CG in a major blockbuster sucked? How many times have I had to say that in the last few years? It's become an ongoing issue, particularly unfortunately with the MCU and the DCU. Like, a lot of these major films have looked ugly and the CG has absolutely sucked. But here, guys, to my surprise, the CG in this film was actually exceptional. The CG in this film was good, but again, no one saw it. And so, of all of the great things that this film has, what doesn't it have? apparently an audience. Apparently, the one thing that this film is lacking is an interested audience, because when I even asked my friends and even family, I was like, guys, why don't you see Dungeons and Dragons? They were like, ugh, Dungeons and Dragons? Ugh, that's for nerds. Like, ugh. And I was like, guys, comic books were also for I wish they had given this movie a chance, but like I said, hopefully it will find an audience in the ancillary market, and hopefully there will be enough for a sequel. I don't know, but it's gonna have to be enough for me that this film exists at all. Okay guys, so moving on to the next film, and next movie up we have is Air. Now Air is directed by Ben Affleck, and it tells the story of how Nike created this incredibly lucrative deal with none other than Michael Jordan, the basketball superstar. Now this film focuses particularly on Sonny Vaccaro, who is Matt Damon's character in the movie. He used to work at Nike, and he was part of the basketball division, you know, dealing with all of the basketball merch that they had, but it wasn't doing particularly well in the late 80s. They were really flopping. Okay, basketball was seen as Converse and Adidas's realm, and Nike really didn't have a presence, you know, in that industry, and so they were really trying to break through somehow, but they also weren't given a huge budget to do so. I believe it was about 200 grand that they had to work with, and the initial plan was to divvy up that money with smaller sponsorships and smaller licensing deals so that they can get some minor players in the NBA to be the face of their new lines. But then you have Sonny come along and he says, listen guys, if we are going to do this, we need to take a big swing, because otherwise this whole department is going to be shut down and everyone's losing their jobs. So we need to think big. Okay, we need to make this happen, and who is bigger than Michael Jordan? Now mind you, this was in the 80s, before Michael Jordan had actually made, you know, a real name for himself in basketball and had become the legend and icon and global superstar that he would become in the 90s. But still, he was already a really big deal as a player and was, you know, proving himself time and time again on the court. So he was a really high value name for Nike to get, and it would take the entirety of their budget to do so, making this one of the highest paid contracts with an athlete at the time. But Sonny really had a vision here. Like, he really saw the potential that Michael Jordan could have and how big he could become. I doubt that he could have predicted just how big he would become. No one would have, apart from maybe Michael Jordan and his family, right? But you know, the way that the story is portrayed in the film, it shows Sonny really having a lot of faith and inspiration in Michael Jordan's talent on the court, and really wanting to, you know, push forward and make a deal with him so that he could be the new face of Nike's basketball division. But the problem is, not only was Nike really unpopular with the basketball crowd, but Michael Jordan himself had no interest in pursuing a contract with Nike. He wasn't a fan of them whatsoever. He had no interest in pursuing a contract with them. And so it was really up to his mother, Dolores Jordan, brilliantly portrayed by the one and only Viola Davis, to convince her son to take a meeting with the Nike guys so they could pitch to him. In the end, of course, we all know through the trials and tribulations, Nike finally got Jordan to sign that contract, creating one of the most lucrative deals of all time for an athlete, and also setting an important precedent, you know, in, you know, this kind of industry, allowing an athlete like Michael Jordan to get points off of, you know, each sale of a product or each sale of merch. And that was something that Dolores really pushed for on behalf of her son. Normally this was unheard of. Normally he would have just gotten a licensing fee of the 250k, which was already a huge amount for that time, but because she pushed forward and got him points off of each sale, it meant that he made millions upon millions upon millions and continues to make millions upon millions upon millions off of the Air Jordan line. And like I said, it set an important precedence for other athletes pursuing this kind of contract with such companies as well. You know, it really allowed these athletes to be able to get a ton more income from these very lucrative deals, so that it wasn't just the companies benefiting financially off of their name and their image, but they were also able to benefit financially off of it as well. And now that I've told you guys the overall story of Air, which again you guys did not see this film also had a very low box office, which is sad to see. It is an Amazon Studios film, so it will be dropping on Prime at some point, but they actually pumped a lot of money into this production as per Ben Affleck's request, you know, demands, but he wanted his crew to get paid. Okay, he wanted his crew to get paid, and paid they did get. I think the total budget for this was like 80 to 100 mil, very high for a film of this kind of scale. And the film is quite small, you know, it plays more like a play. Actually, there are very few sets, very few locations. It's not as fancy as Dungeons and Dragons, even though it has a very similar budget. So yeah, whilst I am happy that people got paid on the film, like I love a good payday as much as anyone else, I do think it is a shame that first of all so few people saw it in the cinema, and second of all it may deter Amazon from making such a huge investment in such a film in the future. But anyways, as I was saying, since I've already explained the overall story to you guys, I guess I can dive into my thoughts on the film itself. It was good. Next. It was good. Okay, to expand on my thoughts, it felt like a classic film. Do you know what I mean? There was something about it that just felt so retro, and it wasn't just the fact that it was set in the 80s, but just the structure of the film itself, its simplicity, you know, the way that it was directed by Ben Affleck. Like, he really just got to the nitty-gritty of what was going on. Stylistically, there weren't many like very strong choices. The set design was pretty plain, very 80s, as well the costumes and everything, but it didn't feel like a bombardment of, you know, strong artistic choices from Ben Affleck. It was just like a really well set up and produced story, you know, play almost, like I said. And I think ultimately what really drove the story forward is the really great and compelling performances from the cast. I mean, it has a really strong cast here, and in particular the standout performances for me were, of course, one, Viola Davis, duh okay, love me some Viola. She was a little bit underused here. I would have liked to see a little bit more of her, especially because she played such a key role in the negotiations for this contract on behalf of her son. But secondly, we have Chris Messina, who portrays Michael Jordan's agent at the time. He is hilarious. Okay, he is fantastic in this film. Like, truly, he was really, really good. We also had Jason Bateman portraying Rob Strasser. He was the head of marketing for the basketball division, and he was great. You know, there aren't really many stakes on the Nike side of things in this movie. At the end of the day, these guys are, you know, corporate fiends. Like, you don't really feel bad for corporate like, you don't really feel bad for the suits. Do you know what I mean? I think through Jason Bateman's character, they managed to set up some pretty good stakes for the story to really emphasize why it was important that the basketball division succeed with this contract, because he was talking about how his daughter, you know, he only saw his daughter on weekends, and he got her trainers, you know, every weekend so that she could like him. It was very sad. And he was like, listen, if I lose this job, man, I'm still gonna get the trainers. I'm still gonna get the trainers for my daughter, because that's the only thing that we bond over. And so yeah, I think that little moment of emotionality there was really needed to set up some sort of stakes, like I said, on the Nike side of things. On top of the fact that, of course, you know, everyone was going to lose their jobs and the division was going to go down if this didn't work out. But I think having one central character to really embody all of the struggles of the division was smart. And it was also really great seeing Chris Tucker. He doesn't have a huge role in this movie, but it was really great seeing him on the big screen again. But then of course you have the main guy who this is all about really, Matt Damon portraying the main character Sonny, and I think he was really great here as well. Not doing anything astoundingly different from what we've seen from him previously, but he carries the story forward really well, gets us invested in what is, you know, largely boring and corporate, but he gets us invested. Now, if I did have a couple of critiques for Air, first of all, this isn't necessarily a critique, it's just a big question mark, but the choice not to include Michael Jordan. I kind of see both sides to this. I feel like, you know, having Michael Jordan, the subject of this very important contract, would be a good idea, you know, in theory, right? But at the same time, who would you cast? Would it be distracting? Like, it's not really a film that's about Michael Jordan necessarily. We do need one at this point. Like, we definitely need a film about him. But this isn't it. Like, this isn't that film. So I can kind of see how they could get away with just having a cameo of the guy. Although throughout the film, when you only see him from behind or when you only see him from the neck down, it really reminded me, it reminded me of that character from Proud Family who was essentially Michael Jordan, okay, a parody of him. In that series as well, you only see that, I think his name is like Kelly, something Kelly. You only see him from the neck down as well, and that's what I kept thinking. It was a little bit distracting actually. It's what I kept thinking when I was watching Air. So I think, you know, either way would be distracting because he's such an iconic and legendary person. But you know, the choice to not have him be present in the film was interesting. And I think in theory it would have put more emphasis on his parents, but they didn't do enough with his parents to merit that. So I don't know. It was just a little bit, I had a question mark, like I said. And the second critique that I had is, whilst I was engaged from start to finish in this film, by the end of it, I did feel like it stopped quite abruptly. Like it came to a really sudden end, because I was expecting like there to be a montage or a follow-up on what happened when the Jordan shoes came out, like when the Air Jordans became popular and part of the pop culture lexicon. Like I was expecting a follow-up basically to the contract. We got some stats at the end for how well it did in the first year and how well it's done since then. We got some footage of the actual Michael Jordan, you know, playing and talking and being with his mother, which was great. But yeah, I did expect there to be like a little bit more exploration of what happened afterwards when the shoes were a really big hit and how they, you know, changed the landscape of, you know, sneakers forever or something. Like, I don't, they're a pretty big deal. They're a pretty big deal, okay? There is actually a documentary on this specific topic of what happened when Air Jordans became really popular. It's called One Man and His Shoes by Yemi Bamiro. I believe is how you pronounce their name. But yeah, I actually want to check out this documentary so that I can get like a companion piece to this film to kind of get a better understanding of the follow-up from the success of this contract. But you know, there was another documentary. There was another documentary that I did check out after seeing this movie, and I was in the sort of Michael Jordan sort of worship era. Okay, that sort of headspace that I was in early April. I watched the entirety of The Last Dance on Netflix for the first time ever. Yes, it's true. I had never seen The Last Dance before, guys. I'm not a sporty person. This may come as a shock to literally no one. It won't come as a shock to anyone, okay? So when The Last Dance did come out, I was really reluctant to like pay attention to it. I didn't really care. But after watching Air, I was like, you know, I actually want to learn a bit more about this Michael Jordan fellow, because even though he's always been a part of pop culture, you know, for as long as I remember, he was, you know, playing before I was born, but still, like even in the early 2000s, like he was a really big deal. And again, he was in the Proud Family. So like, that's how you know he was a big deal. But even with all of that, I didn't really know a lot about him. So I was like, let me watch The Last Dance. And I absolutely loved it. I watched it in pretty much one sitting, or over 2 days. I was obsessed. I was like, oh my goodness. And also I was watching it with my brother, who actually has a lot of basketball knowledge, so he was able to fill me in, and I just became really invested in the story of the Chicago Bulls. I was like, okay, Scottie Pippen, okay. But by the end I was fully on board. I was fully indoctrinated. Like, that was such a wild ride. But yeah, if you haven't watched any of these, like if you haven't watched Air or The Last Dance, I would highly recommend them. And also be sure to check out One Man and His Shoes. I haven't watched the documentary yet, but I feel like it would fit perfectly in this watch along. And the final film that I wanted to talk about in this what I've been watching is Rye Lane. Rye Lane is a UK based rom-com directed by Rain Allen Miller, and it stars David Johnson and Vivian O'Para. And this is basically a really sweet rom-com that focuses on these two Black British characters who are living in London, and they're going through it, okay? Especially David's character. He just broke up with his girlfriend. Well, I mean, it wasn't like that recent. Okay, some time has passed, but he's still, you know, in a really bad space right now, because his girlfriend actually cheated on him with his best friend. You know how it is. Hopefully you guys don't know how it is, but yeah, it's been a really tough few months for this poor David fellow, and so he's like crying in the bathroom when we first meet him, and then that's when Vivian's character kind of pops up and he's like, yo, what's going on over there? But they end up spending the day together and having, you know, a bit of fun, you know, going around the streets of London, which have been stylized and made to look really colorful and beautiful. I believe the opening sequence is set in Brixton or somewhere in South London, so the colors are really vibrant and they've really emphasized the Afro-Caribbean cultures that are present in South London, so it's really beautiful. And they're just, you know, getting along and talking about life and the struggles that they've had, particularly David. But initially they rub each other off the wrong way, but as they learn more about each other, they start to see that they have a few things in common and they start to really like each other. And at first it starts off with Vivian's character pretending to be David's girlfriend in front of his ex. That old Wattpad trope, okay? The pretend girlfriend and boyfriend trope. We all love to see it. But yeah, they're initially pretending, but of course it starts to become real. They start to actually fall in love. But then they have a fight and it's all downhill. But wait, at the very last second, at the very last second, there's hope for a happily ever after. Honestly, the story itself isn't the most original. We already know what's going to happen from the second that the film starts, honestly. What keeps you engaged in this story is, first of all, the characters themselves, brilliantly portrayed by David and Vivian, but also the world building, the way that they've depicted London and how stylized this film is. I mean, unlike Air, which seems, you know, pretty standard when it comes to the directing, here you see the director really trying to bring London to life in this new and unique way. And I think it was, you know, really refreshing. And, you know, obviously the fact that you have these two Black leads in a rom-com as well, which is virtually unheard of in Hollywood, let alone in Britain. Let alone in Britain, okay? That was also a really welcome change. It wasn't just a superficial decision, because Afro-Caribbean culture is highlighted throughout the film and in the way that the environment is designed, which is so cool. So yeah, there isn't much to say about this movie, honestly, other than it's really sweet and charming. It's very different, especially as a UK-based rom-com, because of the kinds of characters and cultures that are highlighted here, but also because of, like I said, that artistic direction from the filmmaker, which is really refreshing and new. I also like how the story, whilst being quite predictable, let's face it, if you've seen one rom-com, you've kind of seen them all. Well, at least if you've seen 5 rom-coms, you've seen every single one of them. Okay, so this definitely fits into the archetypical tropes that we've come to know and love from rom-coms. But still, even though these tropes are very common, the execution of this story is still very engaging and endearing, and you're still invested in these characters. And also, it doesn't overstate its welcome. This film isn't like a million years long. I know it's become rather popular to make us sit through 3-hour, 4-hour movies these days. But this movie is just a nice, concise hour and a half, and it's time well spent. So I very much enjoyed it, and I would highly recommend it to you guys, especially if you're looking for a cute little British rom-com to check out. But that's it from me, guys. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on some of the movies that I've been watching, it's time for you guys to let me know what you think of these films, and also what films you've been checking out lately down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.